Good morning. Imagine the world's most powerful military infrastructure, forced to choose between managing a burning energy crisis in the Middle East and, well, a looming high-stakes standoff in the Pacific.
Right. The strategic arithmetic basically changes overnight.
It really does. And welcome to today's deep dive. Today is Wednesday, the 27th of May, 2026. You are joining us for a comprehensive intelligence briefing titled Strategic Crossroads: Taiwan, the Philippines, and China's Expanding Reach.
And we should mention this briefing is sponsored by ProWave AI. The underlying intelligence architecture you're about to hear is actually generated by Stylo News, which is an AI-powered news application.
Exactly. For your context, Stylo News is the consumer application of Stylo Intel Ops. That's an enterprise-grade software currently driving operational analysis across, global government, military, and corporate sectors.
Which means you, the listener, have unique direct access to the exact same analytical engine designed to support the world's top decision makers.
Right. And our mandate today is objective clarity. We are analyzing the primary patterns of events unfolding in the Indo-Pacific over the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, we'll examine the operational mechanics at the local, national, and international levels, and we are strictly presenting verified facts and the varied perspectives of the decision makers involved.
And to be clear, we do this without adopting any political position ourselves. So let us begin. The landscape we are surveying today requires looking at multiple distinct theaters simultaneously, right?
It does. I mean, the Indo-Pacific has experienced just a profound concentration of diplomatic and military activity over the past 14 days.
Yeah.
But to comprehend the physical realities on the ground, we really have to first establish the high-stakes diplomacy that's actively driving them.
So let's start with the diplomatic chessboard, specifically that mid-May summit in Beijing between U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. This bilateral meeting serves as the geopolitical anchor for all the military posturing we are seeing today. The U.S. administration entered this summit with a clear stated objective, which was to firmly assert American Pacific leadership and project an unyielding posture of deterrence.
And Beijing's messaging during the summit was equally resolute. I mean, they established very distinct boundaries. President Xi Jinping issued sharp, direct warnings regarding Taiwan.
Framing it fundamentally as a core issue of Chinese sovereignty, right?
Exactly. In official diplomatic communications, this stance was categorized as a fire and water ultimatum.
Wow. Fire and water.
Yeah, in diplomatic parlance, that specific phrasing signifies absolute incompatibility. It indicates that any improper handling of the Taiwan issue by external forces, well, it offers no middle ground.
It could inevitably force a kinetic conflict.
Precisely. China's stated position leaves zero ambiguity here. Taiwan is a non-negotiable red line.
But, those diplomatic ultimatums in Beijing, they kind of ring hollow if we ignore the broader global backdrop that's complicating the leverage in that room.
That's a crucial point. The United States is not solely focused on the Pacific theater right now.
Right. There is a protracted, ongoing conflict involving Iran, which is currently culminated in the closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
And that closure is actively draining U.S. missile stockpiles and severely straining global logistics.
The mechanical reality of that closure really can't be overstated. We're not just talking about elevated oil prices here.
No, not at all. Asian economies, specifically the Philippines, Thailand, and Vietnam, they rely heavily on liquefied natural gas, or LNG.
Right, which passes right through that specific maritime choke point to power their domestic grids.
Exactly. When that flow stops, these nations face immediate energy emergencies. Furthermore, the conflict in the Middle East requires the U.S. to expend highly advanced, multi-million-dollar interceptor munitions on a daily basis.
Let's use an analogy here to clarify the mechanics of this stretched deterrence. Consider a city fire department. If your most capable trucks, your most experienced personnel, and your water reserves are currently deployed, actively fighting a massive multi-alarm warehouse fire in the Middle East.
I see where you're going with this.
Right. The party looking to test boundaries in the Pacific recognizes that the response time and available resources are going to be severely compromised.
That is the exact strategic calculation taking place, because deterrence is a psychological mechanism as much as a physical one.
Right. It relies entirely on the capability to respond with overwhelming force and the undeniable resolve to actually use it.
Right. So if regional allies and strategic competitors calculate that your logistical supply chains are stretched thin, the credibility of that deterrence structurally weakens.
And that perceived distraction is the primary catalyst driving regional allies in the Indo-Pacific to rapidly and aggressively alter their own defensive postures.
Which brings us to the ground game. Moving from the diplomatic summits to the physical terrain, regional powers are aggressively hedging their bets.
Yeah, we are witnessing a massive surge in militarization, most notably highlighted by the Balikatan joint military exercises currently taking place in the Philippines.
Right, involving roughly 17,000 troops from 7 different nations.
But it's the specific deployment of weaponry that really demands our attention here.
Mm-hmm.
During these exercises, Japan fired Type 88 anti-ship missiles from Philippine soil, specifically from Laoag in northern Luzon.
And the geographic selection of Laoag is not a coincidence. I mean, it is the core of the strategy.
Because it sits right on the edge of the Luzon Strait, right?
Exactly. The Luzon Strait and the Bashi Channel. If you visualize the first island chain, that string of major archipelagos extending from Japan down through Taiwan to the Philippines.
It essentially forms a wall containing the East China and South China Seas.
Precisely. By placing anti-ship missiles in northern Luzon, Japan and the Philippines are demonstrating the capability to lock the door of the Bashi Channel.
Showing they can physically prevent a naval force from breaking out into the open waters of the Western Pacific.
And the historical precedent here is staggering. This marks the first time since the conclusion of World War II that Japanese combat troops have operated within the Philippines.
Wow. First time since World War II.
Yeah. This integration was only made mathematically possible by a reciprocal access agreement ratified just last year in 2025.
It represents a profound structural pivot for Tokyo, doesn't it?
What?
Because for decades, Japan has maintained a strictly pacifist, defensive posture.
Yes, bound by its post-WWII constitution. Now, the operational posture is shifting toward proactive military expansion.
And the launch of the Type 88 missile is just one facet of that. They're actively deploying low Earth orbit military reconnaissance satellites, too.
Right, and openly discussing the acquisition of counterstrike capabilities. They're fundamentally rewriting their security architecture.
At the same time, the United States is introducing highly specific hardware into this same environment. During these Balikatan exercises, U.S. forces launched Tomahawk cruise missiles from a mobile Typhoon system.
Yes, temporarily stationed in Luzon.
And the Typhoon system is road mobile. It can be moved through jungles and hidden relatively easily, which drastically complicates an adversary's targeting calculus.
It does. However, this level of militarization is causing severe internal friction. Within Japan, there are significant domestic protests.
Right. Citizens are actively debating the constitutional constraints and the very real risk of being drawn into a broader, catastrophic regional war.
It is a deeply polarizing issue for the Japanese public. However, from the perspective of the defense ministries in Tokyo and Manila, this expansion and integration is viewed as an absolute mathematical necessity.
They view a robust, interconnected defense network as the only viable mechanism to maintain regional stability. But, I have to play devil's advocate for a moment.
Go ahead.
Looking at the mechanics of escalation, if the stated objective of the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines is to maintain a calm, stable status quo, doesn't rolling up with road mobile missile launchers and 17,000 combat troops do the exact opposite?
It's a valid question.
Doesn't that physically prove China's point that the allies are the ones escalating the situation?
Well, you are describing the fundamental mechanism of the security dilemma.
Right.
In international relations, actions taken by one state to increase its own security, like forming new alliances or deploying advanced weapon systems, inherently cause neighboring states to feel less secure.
Which invariably prompts them to respond in kind.
Exactly. To the Allied forces, these exercises are the very definition of deterrence. To Beijing, as explicitly stated by the Chinese Ministry of National Defense, these actions are categorized as neo-militarism.
They're viewed as dangerous, provocative escalations that directly threaten Chinese sovereignty and regional peace.
Yes. So we must examine China's operational response, because they're not merely issuing diplomatic objections, they are actively changing the facts on the water.
Right. Following the U.S.-China summit on May 19th, China deployed its Liaoning aircraft carrier group into the Western Pacific for highly publicized, routine annual exercises.
And the deployment of a carrier strike group is a very specific instrument of statecraft. A carrier like the Liaoning is not just a vessel.
It's a floating sovereign airfield.
Exactly. One that extends a nation's air defense identification zone and strike capability hundreds of miles outward.
And these exercises involve long-range tactical flights, complex live-fire drills, and integrated escort operations.
Furthermore, the landing is not operating in a vacuum. The Director General of Taiwan's National Security Bureau, Tsai Ming-yen, recently reported that over 100 Chinese vessels are currently operating across regional waters.
Projecting presence from the East China Sea all the way down through the South China Sea. That footprint, over 100 vessels, represents a massive logistical undertaking.
It does, and we are seeing reports detailing the precise application of gray zone tactics across this footprint.
Right, like People's Liberation Army or PLA, aircraft routinely crossing the Taiwan Strait median line.
Yes, and we are tracking large maritime militia fleets physically asserting control over disputed waters.
There are also unverified yet widely reported incidents involving the use of cyanide near the Second Thomas Shoal,
Which is reportedly deployed to intentionally disrupt Philippine civilian fishing and supply operations.
The mechanics of these gray zone tactics are highly calculated, right?
Extremely. A gray zone operation is an aggressive, coercive action intentionally calibrated to stay just below the threshold that would trigger a conventional military response or invoke a mutual defense treaty.
Consider the maritime militia. By using ostensibly civilian fishing vessels to swarm disputed reef, a state creates a deniable physical barrier.
Right. If an opposing navy fires on unarmed fishing boats, they instantly become the aggressor.
And regarding the reported use of cyanide, the objective is environmental degradation.
Yes. By destroying the reef structure, you eliminate the ecosystem that supports the local fishing economy, and you physically undermine the structural integrity of the reefs where opposing forces might attempt to anchor or build outposts.
It's a slow, methodical exhaustion of an adversary's resources without ever firing a kinetic weapon.
And China maintains a highly consistent official doctrine regarding all of these operations. The Ministry of National Defense asserts that these are entirely legitimate, routine patrols.
They frame these maritime and aerial maneuvers as necessary, defensive measures required to protect Chinese sovereign territory against external interference.
Which creates a closed loop of competing operational narratives. Every action taken by the Allied forces is viewed as an aggressive containment strategy by Beijing.
Conversely, every patrol or gray zone operation conducted by Beijing is viewed as an aggressive expansion by the Allies.
Right. The entire theater is currently locked in an action-reaction cycle, managed almost entirely through these high-friction gray zone encounters.
So let's pivot from the deployment of military hardware to the human element managing this crisis. How are regional leaders physically navigating these pressures?
Well, looking at the Philippines, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. has publicly acknowledged a geographic reality. The proximity of the Philippines to Taiwan makes their involvement in any potential conflict almost a certainty.
So he is executing a highly complex diplomatic balancing act.
He is. On one front, he's scheduled to visit Japan from May 26th to the 29th to further solidify defense and maritime security agreements.
Essentially reinforcing that first island chain wall we talked about.
Exactly. But simultaneously, his administration is actively pursuing diplomatic back channels and direct meetings with Beijing.
The objective being to establish guardrails to prevent these daily South China Sea disputes from accidentally spiraling into an active kinetic conflict.
And the pressure is equally intense across the broader region. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, is currently navigating severe internal divisions.
Right. During their recent Cebu summit, the friction generated by this great power competition was really the defining undercurrent.
Because historically, the ASEAN bloc relies heavily on a strict policy of non-alignment. But maintaining that neutrality is becoming mechanically impossible.
Why is that? Is it because of the global supply chain vulnerabilities we discussed earlier?
Exactly. The closure of the Strait of Hormuz has forced ASEAN to fundamentally shift its priorities. Instead of focusing on geopolitical alignment, the Cebu summit had to urgently pivot toward drafting a unified energy-sharing pact.
Right, because when a nation is facing rolling blackouts because LNG shipments are blocked in the Middle East, securing the domestic economy takes absolute precedence.
They are attempting to insulate their populations while avoiding taking a definitive stance in the U.S. China competition.
And this anxiety is clearly reflected in the digital pulse of the region. When we analyze social media sentiment data, specifically metrics drawn from X, the overarching mood is one of profound operational anxiety.
Yes. Users across the region are expressing deep, localized concern regarding China's assertiveness and the rapid expansion of the PLA's maritime capabilities.
However, the data reveals that this anxiety is multidirectional, isn't it?
It is. There is a significant, measurable volume of skepticism among regional users regarding the reliability of the United States.
Right. Active public discourse is heavily questioning whether U.S. logistical capabilities are spread too thin to actually honor its mutual defense commitments if a conflict were to erupt.
Additionally, the data captures a vocal minority of pro-China voices across these platforms,
Strictly emphasizing constitutional and historical arguments regarding China's sovereignty over Taiwan and the South China Sea.
Yes, ensuring we look at all the prevailing viewpoints impartially.
So, synthesizing this social sentiment data with the official statements from regional defense ministries, where do we actually see broad common ground among these different nations?
The clear common ground is an acute, overriding desire to avoid a kinetic war.
Right.
Whether we look at ASEAN's focus on basic energy resilience, the Philippine government's dual-track diplomacy, or the raw anxiety expressed on public platforms, the consensus is that the economic and human devastation of an armed conflict would be globally catastrophic.
The profound disagreement lies purely in the mechanics of how best to preserve that peace.
Exactly. Whether through the heavy deployment of armed deterrence or through the recognition of established territorial claims.
Which brings us to the operational outlook. Based strictly on the intelligence estimates and data models provided by Stylo Intel Ops, we must assess the most probable courses of action.
And the primary intelligence assessment is definitive here. An immediate kinetic attack or a full-scale amphibious invasion of Taiwan by China is assessed to be highly unlikely in the near term.
What are the specific indicators driving that assessment?
Well, to execute an operation of that magnitude, a military requires massive, highly visible logistical surges.
Right, you can't just hide that.
Exactly. We would see the requisitioning of civilian roll-on, roll-off ferries, the mass mobilization of strategic reserves, the stockpiling of blood plasma near military hospitals, and a massive concentration of rail logistics.
And none of those indicators are currently presenting in the satellite telemetry or signals intelligence.
None.
But the absence of an imminent invasion does not equate to the absence of a threat. Right.
Precisely the opposite. The operational threat is moderate and highly persistent.
So the primary risk matrix in the immediate future is dominated by an increase in gray zone encounters, sophisticated cyber operations targeting critical infrastructure, and sustained political coercion.
Yes, the intelligence models indicate that China will systematically continue expanding its regional denial posture. The objective is to normalize a heavy PLA presence around Taiwan and contested maritime features.
Steadily raising the risk calculus for any U.S. intervention.
Exactly. And in response, the allied defense ministries, the U.S., Japan, and the Philippines will almost certainly accelerate their joint exercises and aggressive modernization programs.
It's a long-term strategy designed to build an undeniable wall of collective deterrence. So, based on this intelligence architecture, what are the specific operational markers you should be monitoring in the coming days and weeks?
First, track the specific outcomes of Philippine President Marcos Jr.'s ongoing trip to Japan. Any newly announced defense pacts, base access agreements, or joint weapon development programs will significantly alter the regional balance.
Okay, what else?
Second, maintain visibility on the operational patterns of PLA naval patrols. Any deviation in their established routes or closer proximity to Allied vessels will serve as an indicator of a tactical shift.
And finally, we must factor in an element that routinely dictates military operations: the environment.
Yes, Taiwan and the surrounding maritime theaters are currently experiencing extreme heat, with temperatures nearing 40 degrees Celsius, alongside a delayed Mayu or plum rain monsoon season.
Wait, how does that specific weather pattern alter the strategic reality on the ground?
Extreme heat severely degrades both human endurance and equipment efficiency. Sustained 40-degree temperatures reduce the lift capacity of rotary wing aircraft, strain the cooling systems of advanced avionics, and interfere with thermal imaging and radar efficiency.
Oh, wow. And when you combine that with the unpredictable torrential downpours of a delayed monsoon season.
The logistical complexity for naval deployments, aviation readiness, and amphibious staging multiplies exponentially for all actors in the theater. Nature ultimately dictates the operational tempo.
Well, that covers the intelligence landscape for today. We know it is a heavy topic, and we really appreciate you taking the time to unpack the mechanics of all this with us.
It's crucial context for anyone watching these events unfold.
Absolutely. And before we conclude, we want to ensure you know how to access this level of analytical depth for your own situational awareness. Today's deep dive was powered by Stylo News.
Right. Stylo News is a mobile and computer application that you can download and customize to receive personal, intelligence-style briefs exactly like the one you heard today.
It aggregates and analyzes data from hundreds of traditional news sources and X, utilizing the exact same AI technology trusted by global enterprise and government operations.
In an environment absolutely saturated with noise, it is a highly effective tool for isolating the core dynamics that actually drive global events.
It really is. If you require AI-powered news on demand, tailored to the specific geopolitical or market forces you need to track, we encourage you to subscribe by visiting www.stylonews.com.
Highly recommend checking it out.
And on a more personal note, we want to thank you so much for joining us today. We would love to hear what complex systems or regions you want us to investigate next.
Yeah, please request topics for future deep dives and ensure you follow Stylo News on your preferred social media platforms.
Before we go, as we observe this incredibly dense web of military alliances, mobile missile deployments, and constant surveillance, it leaves us with a critical operational question.
As nations increasingly integrate advanced technology and artificial intelligence into their defense networks and intelligence gathering, how might a single misinterpretation of sensor data in these highly monitored, high-stress gray zones alter the balance of global power overnight?
Something to consider. Thanks for listening, and until next time.